And now we welcome back in Jimmy Stein, team expert for Bama Online, to react to Alabama's 24-21 victory over Arkansas. With Alabama being a 19.5 point favorite going into this one, a 3-score favorite, and the fact that they had such a commanding lead, at any point it felt like Alabama could really start to run away with it. They kept letting Arkansas hang around and let them continue to make plays. Alabama did some things to shoot itself in the foot, which allowed Arkansas to hang around and give them a ton of credit for taking advantage of those opportunities. But Jimmy, just what were your reactions to take us through kind of your mindset throughout the game? It kind of started
Sure.
a little bit rocky, and then they really started to get some things going. The vertical shots were hitting. The defense was playing extremely well, and then things started to fall apart in the second half a little bit. Kind of just take us through that roller coaster.
Sure. Well, a common thing that we say around here, I don't know that it started with basketball coach Avery Johnson, but we often say tale of two halves because I think that's just common in sports. It's not just an Alabama thing. But this wasn't a tale of two halves to me so much as it was almost a three-act play, I guess, because to me it was three acts. Act one was Alabama getting off to a really slow start, which was, in my mind, 1,000,000% predictable. We talked all week on the premium message board, the roundtable of BOL. We had talked all week that boy, everything is in place here for a flat performance, starting with an 11 a.m. kick, coming back from an emotional road win to a team that probably feels good about itself for the first time. Whenever you start feeling really good about yourself in college football is the time you usually get humbled. That's pretty common throughout college football, not just Alabama. But everything was in place for a flat start, and that's, I think, exactly what started. It was a sleepy crowd, and I was a part of that sleepy crowd. I was a little sleepy, and along with the other 100,000 people that were there, it was very quiet to start the game, which is a little unusual. But the first act was, I think, 100% just predictable, flat start. Act two was when Alabama got its act together. The long throw to Prentice, I think a great route, by the way, that Kobe Prentice ran as a deep safety, came up to cover the tight end and leaving a lot of green grass open. And whether it was the route design or an ad lib, I don't know. But Kobe Prentice charged through an empty safety spot, and Jalen hung it up there in a way that Kobe was gonna run under it because he was all alone back there. But anyway, that kind of kick started what I would call Act Two, which is pretty much some level of domination by Alabama because while Alabama wasn't exactly steamrolling up and down the field, they were moving the ball and scoring, and Arkansas wasn't moving the ball at all. At halftime, Arkansas had 98 yards of offense total and 3 first downs. So Alabama, even though they gave up 6 points, wasn't really giving up much. But Act two was Alabama winning the game in a manner in which most foresaw with a 19.5 point spread. I think Alabama in Act two sort of would have won a 60-minute game by 19.5 points or more the way they played in Act two. Act three, we swing back to Arkansas. It started with the Jalen Key personal foul. For whatever reason, it was like flipping a switch. That play happened, and for the rest of the game, pretty much, Arkansas had a ton of momentum. Alabama may have wrestled it back very, very late, converting a couple of third downs, so Arkansas couldn't get the ball back. But Act three was, to me, the most disappointing, Clint, because it wasn't predictable. Act one was predictable, the flat start. Act two, Alabama sort of dominating the game, is sort of what most everyone would expect. Act three was the disappointing part, and it started with the Jalen Key personal foul that extended a drive that was over. And that's what kind of started, the momentum. Momentum in sports is a crazy thing, Clint. It really, when the rocks start rolling downhill, then it's a landslide, right? It never starts with a landslide. It starts with a few rocks rolling down the hill, and that triggers a landslide. And we see it in sports all the time. We saw it in that with the Alabama game, and that's kind of how I see the game in three acts. But Alabama does end up winning, and for all the gnashing of teeth, trust me, that could have ended much worse than it did.
Yeah, and it always surprises me how you can predict something. Now, granted, score predictions are different. I say different, maybe they shouldn't be. You knew that it was the possibility for a trap game. We talked about it all week. Then you get into the BamaOnLine score predictions, staff score predictions, and you don't pick it that way because it's so hard to tell. Alabama should beat this team soundly. Defensively, they were dealing with a ton of injuries. Alabama's issues have mostly stemmed from the offense this season. So just with the offset there, you think they should be able to put up plenty of points. And I say plenty, it's not like they're going to score 40 or 50 necessarily, but they should score in the mid to high 30s. The defense has been playing lights out. The Arkansas offensive line has not been good this year. You look at Alabama's pass rush. KJ Jefferson hadn't looked like KJ Jefferson. Rocket Sanders didn't even play. He was the guy that, was second in the SEC last year in rushing yards. So it makes for a blowout when you look at it from that perspective. But where it fell between the emotional win on the road against Texas A&M and the, quote unquote revenge tour, the next two games against Tennessee and LSU, you knew that there was the possibility, especially with it being an 11 a.m. kickoff. And I don't think, like a Texas team, they're big name kickoff. Like they're kind of used to playing earlier games. That's part of what Alabama gets one or two of these a year. I would say one or two. And it's difficult to get up for stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The 11, you make great points about the 11 o'clock kick. Some teams are used to that. Alabama certainly not. I mean, we still call it the Jefferson Pilot game, in terms of that's how rare they are. And there hasn't been a Jefferson Pilot game, by the way, in like 20 years. I think it's been over 20 years since Jefferson Pilot was sponsoring the 11 a.m. kicks that happen in the SEC. But those games, those kickoff times are so rare for Alabama. That's kind of what we jokingly refer to them. Whereas other schools playing at 11 o'clock is completely normal, but it's not for Alabama. There should only be one more. I would think that the Chattanooga game is set for 11 a.m. I don't think any of the other four SEC games will be 11 o'clock kicks. I think it had a lot to do with it. You're right, Clint, in terms of, I think you could see a trap game coming. I think you could see a flat performance coming. But when you predict an outcome, you tend to get really analytical. And when you compare their offense to Alabama's defense and vice versa, you're like, hey, Alabama should win this game by, what do you know, about 19 and a half points. That's how Alabama should win this game. All of the BOL staff picks were roughly in that 17 to 21 point range, in line with what the Vegas line is. But you don't want to really predict a flat performance, even though a lot of it was in place. But again, I would like to point out there were some good takeaways. There were some good things that happened in this game. And I'll start with what was big to me. I thought going into this game, Clint, this was Alabama's opportunity to run the ball and work on the run game and have some success with it. And they did. It was easily, in my mind, easily the best game by the collective group of running backs. Talking about, of course, Justice Haynes and Jam Miller getting in on the action, but Jason McClellan and Roydell Williams also with productive days. I think total, I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's 30 carries, 201 yards. That is by far the best running back day. They had a similar day against South Florida. I'm not really sure that should count. But against a quality SEC good opponent, this was their best, most productive day. And Alabama needed that to happen. And it did. And how about Jamin Justice looking fairly good with the ball in their hands when they got their opportunities? I thought Jalen Milroe, for his first 10 pass attempts, he was 7 of 10 for a whopping amount of yardage, all downfield throws. I thought it was vintage Milroe, we could say, for his first 10 pass attempts. And then it went sideways. And maybe Alabama and Jalen were a little overdue for that. Coming into the year, I think a lot of people would have predicted, Clint, that Milroe would be inaccurate, that he would have stretches of just not being able to complete passes, that it would all be a mess. And frankly, it just hasn't been at any real point. Now, there were some turnovers like against Texas, and there's been some not great moments, but that was actually the first full stretch of a game where Milroe wasn't very good in terms of completing passes. I think he was 1 for 10 at one point or 1 for 8 after the hot start. And that's the first time it's happened. And I'm not saying that it should be blown off or that it's no big deal. I'm just saying, hey, a lot of people predicted it would look like that all the time. And it hasn't. It's been good most of the time, but it wasn't good for that stretch. And a lot of that was on Jalen. But for the most part, again, I was thrilled with the run game, with the running backs and Milroe's start. And the challenge going forward, Clint, is how can Alabama on offense combine the success of that run game with the running backs and getting Milroe back on track?
Well, and this is kind of what I was saying before, and we got cut off and had to make a cut. People might have noticed that, but what I was essentially saying before was we predict that this is a possibility. We don't predict it, but you suggest that it's a possibility that Alabama could struggle given the circumstances surrounding this game, and then they struggle, and then people act surprised. I don't think anybody should be shocked by what happened. I think the fact that they got out to the lead, you thought, okay, they are overcoming a lot of this. I just think a lot of that because it wasn't always smooth. Like how Alabama was getting its yardage, it was explosive plays downfield. It was cover bust by Arkansas on a couple of those long touchdowns. I think one was on a corner, one was on a safety. As far as not being able to pass off responsibility, some confusion in the secondary, and it created opportunities for Alabama's vertical passing game. But then, the same thing can be said about Milroe and his performance. Like we say, okay, he's not a finished product. He's getting better every week. Did he get better this week or did he regress? I would say he, started off pretty hot, but even from the jump, I would say what he has done well, he continued to do well, which was the vertical passing, but the areas where he struggled, he regressed and he didn't continue to build on like the short to intermediate stuff, the pre-snap reads, all those things. He continued what we've seen, which is very up and down play on that front, and it was a lot of down, later on in the game. But even a guy like, what's everybody doing, Jimmy? Everybody's in the NFL and all these teams that are out of contention, they're tanking for Caleb Williams. He won the Heisman Trophy last year. He was the Heisman Trophy favorite going into last night. He throws 3 or 4 interceptions. And I made a joke on Twitter about Jalen Milroe and Caleb Williams now have the same number of interceptions on the season. And it goes to show that stats are very misleading. But, even a guy like that, future number 1 pick, everybody's saying he's the next Patrick Mahomes, he has a complete dud. The defense has been a huge problem for USC, but last night, a lot of that result that you saw was USC's offense, and they weren't attacking vertically. They were taking a lot of short stuff. My point in saying that is even the best of the best that college football has to offer right now can put up a complete dud. And I understand that Notre Dame is a much different opponent than Arkansas, but Caleb Williams is also a much different caliber quarterback right now than Jalen Milroe. And so just to see the struggles, is it concerning? Yeah. Because you don't know if those struggles are going to continue. But one thing we have to give him credit for, I don't think you could struggle much more than he struggled once things kind of started falling apart, but he still managed to avoid turning the football over. And that is the most critical piece of all of this. Those are if you turn the football over and you give Arkansas more offensive possessions or more opportunities, especially in plus territory, then you're putting yourself at big risk of losing the football game. And with the way that turned out yesterday, you probably do lose if he turns the football over once or twice. And so him avoiding that, were there opportunities for Arkansas to get a turnover? There were probably 1 or 2, but it wasn't because of some just awful decision that Jalen Milroe made, which has been his big problem with interceptions, not seeing something, throwing it when he shouldn't. And so, at least give him credit for that. But you're right. He started the game 5 of 7 for 191 yards and 2 touchdowns, plus the rushing touchdown. And then he finished from that point forward going 5 of 14 for 47 yards. So, that kind of the up and down play, the short to intermediate stuff, the making the proper reads. I think some of that was just the constant pressure. And I'm not making excuses for Milroe. I'm telling people exactly how I think it played out. And I've been very hard on Jalen Milroe. I think anybody that's listened to us knows I'm willing to criticize when it's warranted, and he deserves a lot of criticism for yesterday with the way that things started to kind of fall apart. But he was under constant duress. When you look at the offensive line, 13 pressures allowed and 5 sacks. All of the sacks, all 5, and almost half of the pressures, 6, came from the left tackle position, which is Jalen Milroe's blind side. And his pocket awareness is still a work in progress. Him being willing to step up in the pocket and make throws, still a work in progress. And so in his blind side, he's constantly worried about, am I going to get crushed and not see it coming? You're not as worried about trying to make the proper reads and stuff. So Alabama's weaknesses right now, they compound. Like they all build off of each other. They're, the snapping issues throw off the rhythm of your offense. The left tackle is struggling. It doesn't matter who it is. Elijah Pritchett, I think, was responsible for 3 sacks and 3 of the pressures on 25 snaps. Proctor was responsible for 3 pressures and 2 sacks on 40 snaps. So Pritchett was actually worse than Proctor, for anybody that was wanting to know why Proctor was starting. But that plays into it quite a bit. I think play calling, even though, and we'll get into that more, but Jimmy, my point is everything that's wrong with Alabama right now, if this was Bryce Young at quarterback, the left tackle struggles would not be as big of an issue because he had great pocket awareness. He understood, he did a great job of feeling the pressure, being able to just, do some side steps, elude it, and continuing to make his reads. It was all very second nature. But Jalen Milroe's weaknesses it creates a perfect storm when you combine it with the left tackle issues, the snapping issues, and just a lot of the dysfunction of this Alabama offense. It all kind of hurts, each other, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah, and imagine playing quarterback. I'm sure all Alabama fans remember his fumbles in the pocket against A&M and all during talk of this offseason. It was, he doesn't protect the ball. He hasn't really suffered from that this year. It's happened a time or two in understandable situations. But my point is, when the pressure's coming from the blind side, the quarterback has to be constantly reminding himself to protect the football at all times. Don't just protect the football when the hit's coming. You have to protect the football when you don't know if a hit's coming or not. So protecting the football and keeping your grip on the ball as well as you can, knowing that at any second you could be blasted from behind, that's got to overshadow your other responsibilities, right? I mean, it's the first thing that you're thinking about. The first thing you're thinking about isn't the read or the route or is Arkansas in a cover, cover shell here, or is it man, or is it plus one, or what's the coverage here? You're thinking of, I've got to hold on to the football because I'm going to get hit from behind,
Jimmy,
and I don't want to fumble.
What and to for the real world example, have you ever done a trust fall? Have you ever?
No.
I mean,
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, go stand on a 5-foot ledge. 5 foot's probably a little high. Go stand on a 3-foot ledge and do a trust fall into your friend's arms, where you don't know if he's going to catch you, or not. Right. But instead, if he doesn't, it's not concrete. It's a 280-pound man trying to kill you. So it's the same feeling where it's a trust fall. I mean, if when people get in those situations, it could be your a parent, a sibling, a best friend that you've known for 30 years. When you're in that situation, the whole idea of fully trusting somebody else with essentially your health, it's a little more difficult to do. So that's exactly what quarterbacks are doing pretty much every Saturday. And when you're guiding and catching you very often, you don't always. It's going to be you're thinking about that concrete a lot.
Yeah, I would say that left tackle right now is Alabama's number one issue on offense. It's not Jalen Milroe. I mean, they're obviously Milroe's got to improve, as every quarterback who's just made the 6th start of his career. There's a lot of improving left to do after you've only made 6 starts. Let's remember Milroe, again, least experienced starting quarterback in the SEC, and now he's got a big problem at left tackle that he has to deal with. And it's not just on the 5 times he sacked. It's this constant pressure and harassment coming from the side that you don't see well. So really a lot of this is going to be on Tommy Rees and the offensive staff to coach around. It's on Wolford. Hey, Proctor's got a lot of improving too. I mean, we're talking about 6 starts for him. Pritchett is a redshirt freshman who hasn't played much. We know that they're going to be good players. As a matter of fact, one thing that cracks me up about fans and the quarterback position, Clint, is we look at a quarterback and we lose confidence in him, and you say things like, he's never going to be good. Who out there thinks Caden Proctor's never going to be good? I mean, of course he's going to be good. This being thrown into the deep end as a true freshman and maybe being a little heavy, that's going to pay off for him big time in the future. I would say, as crazy as it sounds based on how he played, I won't be surprised, Clint, if Caden Proctor plays left tackle next season like an all SEC football player. He could be one of the better left tackles in this league next year, because I think we all know Caden Proctor is going to improve from where he's at. It's funny that we don't say the same thing about quarterback, but of course Jalen Milroe is going to get better and better and better because he's a high ceiling player with that arm talent, with his legs, with his overall athleticism, smart kid, hardworking kid. Of course he's going to get better, and he has gotten better. We just need to remember, as you pointed out earlier in the show, Clint, improvement with sports and athletes in college football is never linear. You don't literally get better. You're going to go sideways a little bit, or maybe even backwards a step. Improvement is over time. It's not literally linear. And we saw that this week. I thought Milroe had played better and better each week until this week. It was not a step forward for him. In some ways, he played okay at times, but the same things that haunt him continue to haunt him, dealing with pressure, pre-snap reads, inaccuracy on the shorter and intermediate throws. Though I will say his last completion was an intermediate throw that, while it scared everybody in the stadium to death because that ball seemed to float for a long time, it was an intermediate, accurate throw that helped win the football game.
If I mean, I guess I'll keep using Caleb Williams as an example. If Caleb Williams makes that throw, everybody's talking about how amazing it was. I saw a lot of people saying, hey, even though it ended up being completed, that was a bad decision given the situation. And I don't agree. I think it was a player making a play. And just because he doesn't do it as often as some other guys and he's still growing in that area, doesn't mean that wasn't just a player making a play. It was a heck of a throw. If we're going to criticize, we also need to praise when it's warranted. And I feel like that was a moment where it was warranted because it was a big time moment in the football game. But you're 100% right. I mean, it's and we need to understand, and I don't think we talk about this enough. And I'm also responsible for that because I feel like I get too wrapped up in, Alabama's got to, continue to take the deep shots, get opposing defenses out of this stack in the box mindset and really hammering run blitzes on early downs and putting them behind the sticks and doing all that. The problem is, and it's not just Milroe, it part of it is that they watch the success that Milroe's having as a deep passer and they say it's not sustainable. Based off of the law of averages, he would have to have one of the best deep ball throwing seasons in college football history if he maintains this pace. So eventually it's going to start to average out. Now, to average out, you actually have to be very poor at it for a while to make it average. And so I think defenses are banking on that, but you also got to realize, Jimmy, it's the personnel. Like, Alabama's inviting stacked boxes. You can't throw two tight ends out there and not expect more defenders in the box. You can't keep your tight end. Everybody talks about, hey, we want to let's leave a tight end in or have him chip or whatever to help out these left tackles. Okay, if you're doing that, or you're adding an extra blocker, you're not sending a running back out for a route. Instead, you're having him in pass protection, which is going to happen a lot. But, tight ends especially, that's one less player that is running a route. That's less strain on the back half of a defense, so they can put more of an emphasis on, the box. Like, it's not as much of an issue. And so you can't have it both ways. Like, you're inviting the defense to play you based off of the personnel. It's all reaction based. Like, defense, they're putting their personnel out there. If a team goes 4 wide, Alabama's going dime, or 4 or 5 wide or whatever. They're going to go with the defensive backs to match that number. And so, even though I think that Alabama can, continue to throw the deep ball, and that certainly will help as far as defenses backing off a little bit, I don't think that you're going to have to. I think what they want is they want the left tackles, one of them, both of them, either to grow up, and I don't mean that from a maturity perspective. I mean as a player, get more experience, get better to where they can hold up and they don't have to do those things. And that's going to take time and reps and everything else. But it's a work in progress, and there's some struggles going on right now, Jimmy. And like I said before, it's all compounding off of each other.
Man, that was an awesome point about Alabama's personnel inviting stack boxes. I think a lot of fans think, well, Alabama's facing a lot of stack boxes because no one respects Milroe's ability to throw the ball. That's ridiculous based on stats. I assure you they're respecting Milroe's ability to throw the deep ball. Anybody, any junior high coach would, because his deep ball, has a stunning efficiency rate. But Alabama's facing stack boxes not because of Milroe's a lack of talent on his part. They're facing stack boxes because the primary personnel package is 12. Alabama's coming out in 2 tight ends. And a perfect example is exactly what Alabama did yesterday. I know we're going to talk about this when we get to Alabama's defense, Clint, but Nick Saban in his press conference when the game was over talked about how, hey, we played Caleb Downs at star this week, which is amazing that this kid's learning all these positions as a true freshman. But we played Caleb Downs at star because when Arkansas was in 12 personnel, we felt we needed a more physical presence down inside than putting a cornerback at star like we had been doing with Terrion Arnold. And boy, Terrion's attempted sack of KJ is a perfect example why we wanted to get a little more physical in the box against Arkansas when they're in 12 personnel. So if Alabama's going to this extreme measure of teaching a true freshman who's been playing safety a whole nother position, then what are teams we're playing against thinking when Alabama's in 12 personnel? Because we're in 12 personnel all the time. So other teams are doing, quote, the equivalent of putting Caleb Downs at star when Alabama's in 12 personnel. And that's why it's been difficult for Alabama to run the ball. We're in 12 personnel. That means there are 4 defensive backs. One of them is really playing up in the box because he's responsible for that second tight end. So that's why Alabama's having some success deep because the back end is pretty naked. And that's why Alabama at times running the ball hasn't been that easy.
People ain't running 2 high quarters against the triple option is the extreme example to put with that. That's just bottom line. It's all reactive as I said before. And so people need to understand that, but it's putting Alabama in some difficult situations because it's not just taking advantage vertically. There are things that defenses are presenting where you need to be able to take advantage of it consistently on the intermediate stuff. And when they're doing things, the Alabama's biggest issue, and I've said it all season, and I'll continue to say it. Now, what's causing the issue? You can get into the deeper, the offensive line, quarterback. If you want to throw running backs in there, whatever. Their lack of success on early downs is putting them in bad situations and behind the sticks. And it's putting them in situations where they're not comfortable as an offense. Jalen Milroe's not comfortable in it. The offensive line's not comfortable in it. You don't want this 350-pound average offensive line, doing a straight drop back in pass sets. It's just they're not built for that, especially when you're going against SEC speed. You have a quarterback. The last thing you want him doing, even though part of me thinks that is not the last thing they want him to do, and we'll, I guess, talk about that too, is you don't want him being a straight drop back passer. And I will say the lack of rushing attempts, design runs for the quarterback, is it some sort of injury? Or is it that they've hammered in Jalen Milroe's head? And I say design quarterback runs, it's just quarterback runs and really in general on all this. If they drilled all offseason in his head to win from the pocket, don't run the football, have they taken away the most special aspect of Jalen Milroe? I can't answer that. Has been speculation that there's some sort of injury. I think that there could be some truth to that. If that is true, I hate to be the team that plays Jalen Milroe the second he gets 100% healthy, because once he does, and teams are kind of, everybody respects his legs. I don't care if he has one quarterback design run over the first 7 games of the season. That 8th and 9th team that they play understand what he can bring to the table as a runner. But you can get lulled to sleep a little bit where it's like you're doing film study and you're like, this guy just doesn't, he doesn't do what he did against Arkansas last year. or against Texas A&M in his start last year. And then all of a sudden he starts hitting you with that stuff, and you're like, man, the speed is deceptive. I'm just saying, if it's injury related, minor injury, whatever, um, you know, I don't know, but for whatever reason, the most desirable part of Jalen Milroe, he's got more desirable traits than just his legs, but the most desirable part is not even being utilized. And I think that should be talked about. How can you properly evaluate Jalen Milroe as a player when his biggest strength, everybody said, well, he might not be the passer that Ty Simpson is, or the passer that, Dylan Lonergan or whoever, but these cats can't bring his legs to the table. They can't be that plus one in the run game to the degree that he can, where he's one of the most dynamic runners in college football. And he's not been that. So how can you properly, and I don't know why that is, but how can you properly evaluate him as a player when you're not getting his biggest strength? So that's something I'll also keep in mind, Jimmy.
I think there's only three possibilities here, and I try to be. I always think the simplest answer is probably the correct one if there is a simple answer. I think there's three possibilities here. One is Tommy Rees is committing absolute coaching malpractice, which is he's got maybe the most dynamic runner in college football at quarterback, and he's refusing to run him because he's trying to turn him into Tom Brady or Peyton Manning in the pocket. And we're just don't care that our quarterback runs a 4.40. Okay, that's one possibility. I find that hard to believe, but that's a possibility. A second possibility is that, and maybe more likely, Milroe doesn't want to run. He has several opportunities in the game to run. He declines almost all of them in an attempt to prove people. Bryce used to say this. Bryce said when he was a really young quarterback, even in middle school and high school, he didn't want to run the ball because he didn't want to be labeled or pigeonholed as hey, here's an athletic quarterback. He's not much of a passer, but he's a good athlete. He didn't want to be talked about in that way, so he forced himself to stay in the pocket and use his arm more. I've never heard Milroe say that, but Milroe plays like it at times, and certainly the last 2 weeks. But Milroe may be refusing to run, even though his coaches would very, very, very much like to see him run more often. I find that sort of hard to believe because Milroe seems an extremely coachable kid. He wants to have success. He wants his team to win. And I have a hard time believing Jalen Milroe or any player isn't doing what he's told to do by Tommy Rees and Nick Saban. I find that hard to believe, but maybe a little more possible than the first thing of Rees just committing coaching malpractice. Third is that Jalen Milroe has a minor injury, obviously an injury that doesn't keep him from playing, obviously an injury that doesn't keep him from throwing the ball pretty well, but an injury that would make running the ball not a very smart idea. I think we saw what happened in Tampa when Milroe wasn't the quarterback, and the team might be a little hesitant now about using anyone but Jalen Milroe at quarterback, and keeping him healthy is number one. And maybe he has an undisclosed minor injury that is affecting his willingness to run and get hit extra times because he's getting hit plenty in the pocket as is, by the way. He also stands in there and throws the ball even though a hit's coming. He's been very brave when it comes to that several times this season, Clint. But I think of the three possibilities as to why we're not seeing Milroe run around. The injury is the one that makes by far the most sense. The other two really stretch logic and reason. The injury thing makes some sense to me, though he's clearly not really hurt or limping around out there. But hey, if you're one hit away from the IR, as they call it in the NFL, then it makes sense that, hey, we're going to limit the runs until he's back to 100% health.
I completely agree. And I was trying to look up a quote, and I didn't get a chance to watch Jalen Milroe's. We're recording this on Sunday, by the way. We're going to be releasing it on Monday morning. Travis does a great job with Second Watch. We want to give that all the attention on Sunday. I can't wait to watch it myself, to be honest with you. But our stuff will be coming out Monday, but we're recording this Sunday. And as of right now, it's Sunday morning, actually. I have had a chance to go back and watch Jalen Milroe's postgame interview. Saw Saban's. I haven't watched the players yet. But I want to say that he mentioned something about he doesn't view himself as a running quarterback, or he doesn't view himself as a dual threat quarterback. And then I just saw something about that. Someone saying a quote. I have to go back and check. But I found that comment interesting, if that is in fact what he said, because I do think that, and he is growing as a passer. But I think that you're 100% correct, where it it's something. There's something there. I mean, that's the bottom line. And this Alabama offense is hard. You've got a guy, like I said. I mean, take take Michael Vick and take away his legs and say stand in the pocket and make throws. He had a cannon for an arm, but being a straight drop back passer without that dynamic rushing ability, he wouldn't have been the player that he was. What made him special? What made him the guy that you wanted to play with the Atlanta Falcons back in like '04 Madden or whatever it is, when he was just, unstoppable. It wasn't because because he had a rocket, for an arm, and it's because he had by far the best rushing ability, speed, all those things, attributes wise, on the game. And so with Milroe, there's something there, and the rest of the offense at this point in time, based off of everything that's going on, they're not able to compensate for that. You've got guys who are trying to help him out. You got receivers. Like yesterday, there were some drops. That was a problem, which, we should give them, the receivers, credit, because up to that point, you might have had the occasional, but based off of what we perceived to be a potential major problem, it has not been a problem up to this point. And so, I say up to this point, up until yesterday, and there were a couple of drops in there, and it was unfortunate. But the offense is still a huge work in progress. There's no doubt about it. And it's really, the receivers did some really good things. They can make the explosive plays downfield. CJ Dupree got injured, so we did see Danny Lewis come in. Black continues to be a guy, 3 touchdowns right now, only 1 behind Jermaine Burton. So it is still possible that he could end up leading the team, which I don't remember if you, me, or both of us, I know you did. I couldn't remember if I said that he could lead the team too, but I do remember you predicting that he would lead the team, that you could see him leading the team in touchdown reception.
I was on your bandwagon there. You were pointing it out as early as the spring practice about how Nye Black could lead the team in targets, or could lead the team in red zone targets. And I sort of yeah, that was a joint production.
Well, we talk so often. B, we're so alike in how we view things. I can never tell if it's you or me. I just know one of us. I kind of just, we're one big collective brain. I don't know how big the brain is. We're one collective brain. Might be
better or worse. We agree a lot. For better or worse, we agree a lot.
Well, let's talk about the defense, because there were some really good moments. There were some not so great moments. The penalty by Jalen Key was a critical point in the football game, and Nick Saban talked about that. The play by KJ Jefferson, as far as, tossing Terrion Arnold to the side and then making a big play. I say this all the time. Sometimes big time players make big time plays in big time moments. And KJ Jefferson has struggled this season. I think a lot of his problem is Dan Enos, if I'm speaking candidly. And I think Arkansas fans would very much agree with me. I don't think that's a marriage that's working out very well. But, Jefferson yesterday looked a lot more like the vintage Jefferson, not from a passing perspective necessarily, even though there were some moments. The offensive line's not very good. You don't have Rocket Sanders. Their star freshman tight end, who was doing some great things, broke his clavicle, and he's out for the season. So that's a weapon in the passing game. So this Arkansas team in general was very depleted. But overall, I still feel the Georgia's defense was not perfect a couple of years ago, and everybody loved their defense. They gave up points. They had bad drives. They made, crucial penalties and mistakes, and they allowed the KJ Jeffersons of the world to make a play every once in a while. And so we always look at the final numbers, especially as years go by, and we look back and say they were incredible. From a numbers perspective right now, I think you're going to look back on this Alabama defense and say it was incredible. You're not going to remember these individual moments very much. But, so overall, I look at, 21 points, not great, but we all know, how some of those things ended up going down. 250 yards. Overall, I feel like it was a good defensive performance, with some lapses, but I guess that was also to be expected, Jimmy, considering the issues that Arkansas currently has offensively.
Yeah, I give the defense a pretty good grade. The 21, I mean, we're staring at it right now on our screen. Everybody can see that. The 21's a little disappointing. And in the end, this game is about points. I mean, I know people like other stats and deep dive stuff and always say points are not stats. points points are kind of the whole shebang. And you give up 21 points. That's a little disappointing. But I think the manner in which they gave up 21, just two plays changed the score that everyone is looking at right now on the screen. 2 plays. The Jalen Key face mask, which had nothing to do with the game of football. That was just a really, Coach Saban himself described it as a very selfish decision. I'm just going to say it was dumb. That was dumb, and it gave life to Arkansas at a time that they were dead, and that revived them, and it changed that drive that Arkansas scored a touchdown on. And then the Terrion Arnold hanging off of KJ Jefferson flapping in the breeze because Terrion's a great player. He's even a really smart player. And I'm sure he would tell you right now, one of the dumbest things he's ever done is hit KJ Jefferson high. That was pretty dumb because you have to be Jaheim Otis sized to hit KJ Jefferson high and get KJ Jefferson to the ground. But regardless of that play was a great play on KJ's part. It really was a great play. And Alabama just couldn't rally any defenders to help Terrion get a 250-pound KJ to the ground. But that play,
KJ Roethlisberger over here.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. And that's so Arkansas's 2 touchdowns were really a result of those 2 plays, because if those 2 plays don't happen, if Jalen never grabs the kid's face mask in their fight, and then Arkansas punts and they don't score on that drive. And if Terrion got KJ to the ground, that drive was over and Arkansas doesn't score on that drive. So the points are a little misleading. It was really 2 or 3 key plays and not a lapse on Alabama's part. I look at that yardage total, Arkansas 250 for the game. In my opinion, Clint, that's shutout territory. I think when you hold a team to 250 yards, that doesn't necessarily mean you shut them out, but it means you might have. So you might shut someone out when you hold them to 250, but you're certainly going to hold them down to around 10 or 12 points. And I think 10 or 12 points is really a better gauge of how Alabama played in this game, is given up 10 to 13, maybe 14 at max. I think that's how Alabama played defensively. For the most part, it was typical of what we've seen in the first 6 games from this outstanding Alabama defense. So I would say the defense was mostly outstanding, part of the time flat, and we'll chalk it up to the same reasons we talked about the offense being flat.
And this is another thing that people do, is they say, okay, Arkansas is not very good offensively. Alabama allowed 21 points. LSU is very good offensively. So Alabama's going to get about 50 in that game. That's not how that works. I mean, there are so many surrounding circumstances that play into that. I mean, is it going to happen? No, but it's possible that Alabama could hold LSU's offense to less points than Arkansas's. I mean, look at Auburn's defense when they went against Joe Burrow in LSU a few years ago. I mean, held him to not a lot of points at all. And then they go out and they allow tons of points to other not tons. I mean, they were a good defense that year, but there were some games where they allowed a lot of points. So it's all, it doesn't go hand in hand like some people think that it does. Overall, I thought the defense did play well. Would like to see them finish a little better. It wasn't just that one play by Terrion Arnold. There was some tackles that needed to be made that didn't always get made. The pass rush, here's the thing, and people need to understand this. Alabama, I think, had 4 sacks yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. This thing never has it correct. It was 4. Right. Four's correct. They had 4 sacks yesterday. Arkansas was doing everything they possibly could to keep Alabama's pass rush from beating them. And I want that to be known. Quick passing game, get the football out of KJ Jefferson's hands, RPOs. It's running the football in obvious passing situations. They had some success doing that. They've seen other offenses do that against Alabama's defense in those 3rd and mediums, 3rd and longs, run the football. And Alabama's defense has given up some yardage in those situations, and that goes in the rushing yardage of the opposing team. But it's also like you were selling out for the pass, so you were at a major disadvantage. So you playing in the run game straight up they're a lot more effective than the numbers would indicate. Uh, but at the same time, that's a situation where Alabama has earned the right to get after the quarterback. It's third and medium, it's third and long. You put your guys out there, let the horses run, and then you run the football. And you know what happens when you run the football in those situations? The pass rush ain't sacking the quarterback. I'll tell you that. So there was a lot of different things, and Sam Pittman knew going in. I watched one of his press conferences. He was very weary of his offensive line, and now he said, "I think has a lot more. This is not a knock on my guys. This is a lot more. Anybody that plays Alabama, you've got to do some things to negate that pass rush, and we feel like we have a pretty good plan going in." That's pretty much what he said. Some variation of that, and they did. And Texas did a lot of that too, by the way, which is why Alabama had 0 sacks in that game. But I actually think, considering what all Arkansas was doing to negate Alabama's pass rush, Alabama getting 4 sacks was actually pretty spectacular, in my opinion. And Dallas Turner was held to half a sack. Like, that's a bad thing. I mean, he's been averaging, over a sack a game up to this point. I think now he's just, he's right at a sack, 7 sacks in 7 games. So he's putting up a special season. The defensive line is applying more pressure. I know Trezman Marshall had a sack. Yeah, Boydby had half a sack. Jamarian Latham had a sack, and I thought that was great to see out of him. He's been kind of that cheetah package lone defensive lineman in most situations. And so, I was actually impressed with their ability to get after the quarterback. I was impressed with Caleb Downs. This guy is playing well beyond his years. At the same time, though, this is also a defense that was missing one of its key pieces in Malachi Moore. And, it's unfortunate because you had the injury to Deontay Lawson, one of your big communicators in your front 7, and then your big communicator on the back half of your defense, Malachi Moore. Soon after Lawson gets back, Moore goes out. So, some of the early season, like, you got great communication, multiple guys who can handle that role on the field at the same time. You've been lacking that in recent weeks.
I think you saw what losing Malachi means to the defense yesterday, Clint. I mean, it's a big, big deal. I've been adamant about this. Malachi Moore is not the best defender Alabama's got. I think Dallas Turner is. Maybe Deontay Lawson, but it's Dallas most likely is Alabama's best defender. Caleb Downs probably in that argument. But Malachi Moore is Alabama's most valuable defender. And there's a difference between being the best player and the most valuable player. But Malachi is the most valuable player on that Alabama defense because of how many positions he plays and the fact that he plays all 3 positions really well. But the fact that Alabama was never really comfortable with who was playing star. Terrion apparently does really well at star when it requires someone to cover the slot receiver down the football field. They love that. But the star also plays inside. He's an interior player. Real simple football stuff. S is for star. S is for Sam. Sam goes out. Star goes in. But the star lines up where the Sam linebacker lines up. That's why there's an S in front of that name, and it's why Alabama. That's the nickname that they chose for the spot. Point being, it's a physical position at times. You've got to have a physical presence there. Just having a pure cornerback is a bad idea in the interior of the defense. So with Arkansas and so much 12 personnel and KJ Jefferson being such a physical presence and Arkansas generally being a physical football team on offense, they knew that, hey, we're going to have to play Caleb Downs some at star here because Terrion's just not going to be physical enough to handle the middle of the field. Well, you know who's really good at handling the physical stuff at star? Malachi. They never substitute. Not one time has Alabama ever thought that they had to play another player at star when Malachi Moore is out there because Malachi is a physical presence and he's still a pretty good cover player for the interior, maybe not outside like Terrion, but inside Malachi's a pretty good cover guy. And boy, missing him meant they had to juggle at star. Missing him meant we saw a lot of Christian Story. And nothing against Story. Actually, I thought held up fairly well. We didn't see him a ton. He's out there really in dime. But when they moved Caleb Downs to star, Christian Story was out there in nickel because Caleb Downs was playing star and nickel. So Christian played a bunch. It just goes to show, Clint, boy, losing Malachi meant back there in the back end, it was musical chairs.
Yeah, 100%. And I thought that approach was so interesting. They platooned that position. with Malachi Moore out, and it was dictated based off of the personnel. If it's 12 personnel, you're going 2 tight ends. It's a heavier package. It's more of a run package. You're putting a guy who can kind of hold up a little bit better. I will say Tyrion, for the cover ability that he provides that position, he does also offer some scrappiness, and he's willing to come up and make hits and things like that. So it's not like, he's not a complete liability there at all. And I remember last year, and I talked about this on the roundtable message board on BamaOnLine. Last year, everybody against Tennessee really wanted Alabama to move a perimeter corner inside to cover Jalen Hyatt. They wanted the athleticism and things like that. There's so much to that position beyond just covering a guy man to man. Like, that's such a limited part of, really, it's like the third thing. I mean, if it was based off of pure cover ability, Malachi Moore would not be out there. I mean, I'll put in even Brian Branch. He was a great cover star, a great nickel defensive back for sure, slot guy, whatever you want to call it. But from a pure cover standpoint, he doesn't offer what some of these perimeter guys can. But that's such a small part. It's an important part, but it's a small part of what that position requires. And you can't just move a guy inside to get that man-to-man, because then Tennessee just would have hammered the football right at that player, which they were capable of doing last year, certainly capable of doing it this year. That's more of their offensive identity this year. And so you can't just do that with relative ease. But I thought it was interesting how, if they go 3 or more wide receivers on the field, they're going to go with Tyrion at star, and they can move and shift some things around because they've got some depth, even though they're dealing with some injuries, and they have all season on the back half of their defense. They still have some guys who they feel like they can get the job done, and then they can play Caleb Downs and, the heavier stuff. I thought that was a very interesting approach. And Jimmy, I'll be curious to see how, if Malachi Moore misses, which there's no guarantee that he does against Tennessee, I'll be curious to see how they deploy that star position against the Vols.
Well, people have to get out of their heads that the Vols on offense look like they did last year. They don't. This is a completely different Tennessee offense. They're very ground based. They run the ball extremely well. They have 2 running backs, I believe, who've outrushed any one Alabama back, I believe. We'll look that up. But Tennessee's rushed for a lot of yards. They run the ball. They take their deep shots. But gosh, I'm not going to talk bad about Joe Milton this week because I'll sort of jinx it, and I don't want to jinx it for all of Alabama by talking bad about Milton, and then he turns into
Peyton Manning.
Peyton Manning. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I say it more about Milroe. The critics at Alabama that get on Milroe for certain things, I think they overblow that, but they're sort of describing exactly what Joe Milton's been. I mean, Joe Milton is what the Milroe critics say he is, but he's not. But Milton is, or he has been so far. I mean, Milton has been inefficient. He has not been great with the deep ball, despite the fact he can stand in Tuscaloosa and throw a ball to Northport. But he hasn't been great with the deep ball. Tennessee's passing game has been either a mess or not great, one of the two. But they run the ball really well. And if you're going to beat Tennessee this year, Clint, you've got to stop the run. That's the first. It's the only thing. It's the first thing. So for that matter, I think Alabama really needs Malachi back. But if Malachi's not back, I think you're right back seeing Caleb Downs a ton at star, just simply because last year it was Hendon Hooker beating you with his arm. This year it's Tennessee beating you with the ground game. And that's what's got to be stopped first. And that's what's got to be first priority for Alabama.
That's really interesting. And the reason that's interesting is if Alabama takes the approach against the Vols that it did on Saturday against Arkansas, where the decision on who plays star is dictated based off of offensive personnel, it'll be Tyrion Arnold, because Tennessee goes 11 personnel over 90% of the time, which is one of the highest rates in college football, certainly in the SEC. So if it's, 3 or more receivers, which is 11 personnel, then you will see Tyrion Arnold. But to your point, they might switch that up, and it might not be dictated based off of personnel. They might elect to go with the fact that they really need that run stopping ability, because Tennessee runs the football extremely well out of 11 personnel.
Exactly. That's what I think they would do. That's just my guess.
No, yeah, and that's certainly, and I'll be fascinated to see if that ends up being the case because I tend to agree with you. Now that puts Christian Story out there. The big question is who do you prefer, Trey Amos or Christian Story? And that's what I think. I think both players are good players. They're both serviceable. You're very rarely going to have some of the guys out that Alabama's had out and continue to have out. Devontae Smith would be playing a pretty big role right now if he was healthy too. And we kind of forget about him, but especially with Malachi Moore out, you probably see Devontae Smith at safety and Caleb Downs playing star pretty much full time with Tyrion staying on the outside. I mean, that's my opinion. I think Devontae would be over Trey Amos and Christian Story as that next guy up. But, him being out, the fact that you're still able to roll out some of these guys, I mean, by the time a lot of teams or defenses get to this level of their depth, where guys are banged up or guys are out, I mean, they would be struggling a little bit. And Alabama was able to hold up and they're able to move guys around. And the versatility that we talked about in the secondary, it has not been on full display as much as I thought it would be, as far as just moving guys around, giving different looks. It's kind of, Alabama's continued to be Alabama, where they kind of deploy people, how they deploy them. They don't move them around a ton. But through the Malachi Moore injury, you have seen a little bit more of that, where they're able to kind of move guys around based off of personnel packages and things like that. So that's a really good point. And to wrap things up as far as the defense, because I mean, it's, you want to give the praise. We got here and we criticize, and there's a lot going on with the offense, and the defense had some moments too and contributed. So you talk a lot about the bad. Also give Arkansas a ton of credit for kicker punter, because as good as Alabama is there, I think Arkansas was actually better in this one particular game. That punter flipped the script. I mean, field position was huge in several situations, but the defense overall, I feel like, is going in the right direction. It's been going in the right direction. They're getting really good play at a lot of positions. There's not one position, Jimmy, that I look at and say that's a major problem on this Alabama defense. Not one.
No, I couldn't agree more. I even with that 21 number next to Arkansas on the screen, Clint, like I said earlier, I don't think that's indicative of how the defense played over 60 minutes. I think the defense played good. I think this is a typical Nick Saban defense. It's not 2011, it's not 2016, but it's also not post 2018. It's that 2008 to 2017, somewhere in there. This group's good, and as much as Kevin Steele is getting a lot of credit, and he deserves it, and so does T-Rob and the other defensive coaches, it's the personnel. It's the person. There are good players everywhere on the defensive line. Tim Smith, Boydby played great again yesterday. Keenan practically won the A&M game. Lawson and Trez played, I thought, really good against Arkansas. We know the outside linebackers are great. The corners might be the best duo in college football. Malachi having a great year. Caleb Downs has to be the best freshman in all of college football. It's a great defense with no weaknesses. You just have to be a little realistic in terms of they're not just going to literally just shut teams out. I mean, it's 2023. It's harder to defend than ever with what offenses are doing. But Alabama's defense is very good. I don't know what will happen against Tennessee, but I think Alabama's defense is going to play well enough to win the game.
I mean, yeah, and having the home crowd at their back too certainly will play a big factor in this one. I got a feeling it's going to be a little bit of a different environment than it was on Saturday. 11 a.m. opponent. Got a feeling Bryant Denny Stadium's going to be rocking on the third Saturday in October.
Yep.
But you're 100% correct. People are a little bit too hard on the defense sometimes, and it's just in today's era of college football, teams are going to score points. One guy that we really haven't mentioned a lot, really haven't even brought him up in some of these conversations, really, since his interception in week 1. But outside of the very selfish, boneheaded decision by Jalen Key, in my opinion, and Nick Saban's opinion, by the way, I thought he played pretty well yesterday. I thought he's been that kind of steady, not doing anything to get you beat at all, does his job every play, let the other guys be the huge game changer playmakers. I kind of have viewed him that way. Yesterday, very reliable. I'll have to go back and watch again. I have not watched the defense back through this. These are initial thoughts. But on the surface, I remember a couple of times thinking Jalen Key's playing some pretty good football today, and it was unfortunate that it's going to be overshadowed by his decision, which is all. I saw somebody yesterday brought up the fact that how Nick Saban called that selfish was that decision was selfish in that moment. Means if somebody would have, if Deontay Lawson had responded for getting shoved, against Texas, and everybody made a huge deal out of that. Sometimes you got to take the 15 yards and show them what's up. Saban, and I can fully admit Saban would have had a problem with that. With Deontay Lawson. My issue wasn't with Deontay Lawson reacting in that situation. It was with the fact that none of his teammates stood up for him, and it's not selfish when you're standing up for your teammate. I mean, it's so I viewed that. I did see some people yesterday. Some people, I saw one person yesterday bring up the fact that see if Deontay Lawson would have reacted, Nick Saban would have called it selfish and all that, which I agree with that point. I don't agree with what some of the criticism was, which was not Lawson, it was the teammates. Beside the point, I tend to ramble, tend to rant, but I love every second of it. Love hopping on here with you. I feel like just getting the thoughts out there, talking about them, working through some things. I appreciate you hopping on here with me. I know we did it a day early today. It'll be going out on Monday, so we hope people enjoy it. And something that I want to try to do if we can make it work. Don't really have anything too much going on Fridays. I would like to do probably like a 30-minute preview, especially with it being Tennessee. You got Tennessee, then you got LSU, you got Auburn coming up, you got a road game against Kentucky. So there's still some really good football teams left on the schedule, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit. So we'll probably throw a small Friday episode into the mix. And Jimmy, as always, I appreciate you hopping on here with me, buddy.
Already looking forward to Friday morning.